Going?
Good, good. How are you, Alice? Nice
Good.
to see you
Good.
for this episode of
Absolutely.
Rethinking
All right.
Legal Ops.
So, hi everyone. As you can now see, we're bringing back Rethinking Legal Ops as a podcast after a several week, perhaps month hiatus. We have our illustrious founder Hans Paul here, chatting with me, and today our topic is going to be a pretty interesting one. We're going to talk about the application of large language models in legal tech and their ethical considerations. So I think why don't we just sort of jump right into it? Does that sound good, Hans Paul?
Sure. Well, thank you, Alice, for being here. Alice is our product evangelist and great team member. So thank you for being here, Alice.
Of course. And all right. So again, thank you to Hans Paul for taking time from running from meeting to meeting to be able to join us in this conversation. So why don't we just start off pretty basically, right? What are LLMs? What are these large language models that are supposedly going to revolutionize the legal space?
Thank you for the question, Alice. So, of course, we have heard of ChatGPT. Most of us are actually using it, especially in the Bay Area. Well, not everyone is using it. Of course, in US, there is a very high level of penetration of apps and online products. In Europe, there is a much lower degree of penetration and adoption. So actually, I'm originally from Europe, but not everyone knows about ChatGPT. But anyways, for those who don't know, actually, ChatGPT is an app, a chatbot developed by OpenAI, which is a company founded a couple of years ago in the Bay Area, and they developed this super cool, super easy to use chat that gives you actually human like answers, very close to like if it was a human. And of course, the technology that they're using on the back end is called AI, artificial intelligence, which is the big family of technology. Inside AI, which is artificial intelligence, you have machine learning. Inside machine learning, you have deep learning, which is machine learning with more data and more parameters and more neural networks. Within the deep learning, you have NLP, natural language processing, which is a specific type of deep learning model focused on semantics and on text. And within NLP, we have these large language models. So this is just to tell where they sit within this categorization of technologies. So large language models are large because they use enormous number of parameters compared to other models. So there is nothing new. Well, there is something new, but there is for sure a huge number of data that make this possible.
Great. And no, I think that sounds like a fantastic primer on what LLMs are. Super accessible. So thank you so much for that, Hans Paul. Now, how do you, as someone who is very immersed in this space, and also someone who's very sort of technically oriented, can you tell us a little bit about how you think LLMs are really changing the legal tech sphere?
Yeah, so LLMs, well, the legal tech sphere, of course, there are many aspects being changed. Before LLMs, we were using classification models, name entity recognition. So machine learning was there since the 2000s. Before there were in the 90s and the other century, we had a lot more regular expression type of innovation in the legal sphere. So regular expression, which means hard-coded formulas to make a machine look like a human. Then we had AI and ML for the first 20 years. Now, the past 8 months, we got a new disruption, which are the LLMs, right? So there's this, I would say, third wave of technological jumps into legal. And so the legal tech sphere is being enormously changed simply for the fact that before you had to do a lot of supervised learning, meaning you had to exactly tell the machine what to do. Now you can do a lot of prompt engineering and a lot of unsupervised learning, meaning those models are eliminating the need for manual close tagging and data analysis, which is a big step ahead. And we can use prompt engineering, meaning asking questions to the models to get the right answers, to do lots of tasks. Yeah.
Right. Wow. So it sounds like we're really on the precipice of a pretty revolutionary time for AI,
It is.
and then also AI in the legal space. So I guess sort of to follow up on what you mentioned, like it seems like there's really a lot of tech that can be leveraged here. Can you talk us through like maybe some of the cases of applications of LLMs in legal tech? Are there any, companies or technologies on the market that like really catches your eye that makes you excited about the space?
Yeah, thank you for proposing this. Actually, it's a very good segue to the first part of the question of how LLM are disrupting or changing the legal sphere. I think there are several aspects of the process from contract drafting. We've seen Gen AI is part is a specific use case of LLMs used to generate new text, new pieces of text based on other language that has learned in the past. So examples are generative applications such as we have companies like Loyo, LexCheck, Juro, Pocketlaw, and others who are very focused on basically automating the generation of the contracts. Not all of them are using LLMs, but I'm just saying those are some examples of company focusing on the generative part of the contracts. Another example is summarizing text, so make it easy for a layman also to understand a difficult text, a difficult piece of a document such as a contract. SpeedLegal is doing that, a few others are, and that's a huge advantage also for non-lawyers. The third part of how LLMs are changing the legal tech sphere is the paraphrasing and redlining the contract in a
All right, sounds fascinating. Oh, sorry to interrupt. Were you gonna? Was there? Did you want to complete your sentence, Hans Paul? Sorry, I sort of cut in there.
There are some new platforms that are recently, such as Harvey and Casetech Co-Counsel, where you.
Oh, there we go. Now you're back. Yes, yes.
Oh, sorry, something
Oh, no
with
worries, no
my
worries.
connection. Thank you. So yeah, I was saying there are a new set of applications focused on Q&A, so questions and answers. Basically, Casetech's Co-Counsel and Harvey are a couple of examples where usually lawyers, professionals, know what to ask. So they ask questions to the model, to the chat, and they get specific answer from the contract. So that's another area of applications that we have seen recently.
Absolutely. Again, all of this sounds incredible. I think before
Thank
we
you,
dive
Alice.
into the ethical dimensions, I do want to ask, like you are the founder of a very amazing startup, SpeedLegal, that's really going to change, I think, how we're going to do contracts. When you were talking about the various use cases, you did situate, SpeedLegal in sort of at the generative application summation capabilities. Do you mind talking a little bit about, like how you see SpeedLegal sitting in this space? Are there other sort of aspects of the use cases that you personally feel like you'd want to, push SpeedLegal toward, to the extent that you are comfortable chatting about it?
Of course. Thank you so much for asking that, Alice. Yeah, well, at SpeedLegal, we're mostly focusing on the dissectioning contract into easy to digest text. So we believe at SpeedLegal that contracts should be as easy to read as the labels on the back of our food. So that's for sure part of our service. Decoding contracts into something easy, make them easy. Also helping to understand where are the deviation from the standard, being a market standard or an internal playbook of the company. So those are the areas where we are really excited about and focusing our research and engineering efforts. We also like to, well, the areas of contract drafting, which is something we will be, adding on top of our current platform later. And yeah, those are the main areas we're focusing on right now.
All right, sounds incredible. So I think the world is just waiting for sort of SpeedLegal to also jump in this space. So it sounds super, super exciting.
Thank you, Alice.
Okay.
I actually wanted to ask you a couple of questions if you're open to that.
Yes,
Cool.
let's please do that. Yes.
Nice. Yeah. So through your studies and research, that maybe you want to say something also about your background if you're open to that. But so, and maybe some of the work you've been doing. What are the ethical considerations when deploying large language models in the legal industry?
Great. No, I think that's a wonderful question. And then also I think a question that really keeps academics and lawyers up at night. So I think in terms of my own background, I'm finishing up the PhD at Stanford, also finishing up law school. And much of my research also does in some ways touch on the application of AI in the legal field and what are the reverberating repercussions of that. So I think, Hans Paul, your question is absolutely excellent and really speaks to some of the key issues we're trying to grapple with. So like very broad overviews, things that we're concerned with is really just, as has been talked about within the AI space, bias and fairness issues. Bias if you have a data set or you have a training set that embodies in some way societal prejudices or biases, we run the risk of those being reproduced in the outputs. We also some have fairness issues. I think Hans Paul sort of alluded to this when he mentioned, this idea that we can democratize AI more broadly, allow other people to be able to access contracts or interpret contracts who they might not be able to. And I think that runs into questions of, in an ideal world, those who cannot access legal services are the ones who benefit from legal tech. But on the other hand, we can imagine scenarios where it's really, the big law firms of the world who can fund and buy the technologies that allow them to be able to leverage AI and the extent to which that's just already compounding existing advantages. And then also something related to accuracy issues as well, right? I think this is something that has emerged in some ways recently, at least within the legal tech space. Hans Paul and I were discussing a little bit earlier about the lawyer in New York who used ChatGPT to sort of help him do legal research. And ultimately, it seemed that ChatGPT had actually hallucinated 6 cases that didn't exist. He included it in his brief, and the judge, as well as opposing counsel, were understandably quite angry. So he's getting sanctioned potentially, and sending quite a warning shot, I think, to lawyers out there about how to be careful when it comes to using AI. And some other issues related to accuracy. There's a paper that folks at Stanford and Berkeley recently put out where they look at the changes in the behavior of ChatGPT over time. And they find like a very interesting result in the sense that they believe ChatGPT is almost quote unquote getting dumber. That some of the more basic questions that the LLM was able to answer in March 2023, like is X or Y a prime number, or can you write me a code to directly execute this thing? It's less competent at doing it in June 2023, so only 3 months after, right? So it's these questions like, oof, like
That's
where
huge.
is this actually going? Right. So I think like it raises questions for us as well of like, well, are we actually training these AI to get smarter, to actually do what we want it to? And not sort of, to belabor the point, but of course, like privacy issues about how to handle legal data. If I don't trust large tech companies to be able to handle my personal data, do I trust, like small mom and pop law firms, to be able to have the capacity to be able to handle my personal data? And also questions of, let's say, like liability and accountability, or even transparency and interpretability, right? Like we saw what happened with the lawyer in New York. This is a man who's been a lawyer for 30 years. Like he's very well versed in law and still had issues trying to interpret the outputs of ChatGPT. What does this say about folks who have less knowledge of the law? And sort of finally, this issue of liability and accountability of legal decisions, right? Like some of the, like one big question that sort of floats around legal academia is why people really obey the law in the first place, right? Like why do people obey legal decisions? And part of that answer is because even if they don't they don't like the quote unquote outcome, they still believe in the process. They believe they were subject to a fair process, and they're still willing to comply, even though if they're, quite a little bit angry. So in this case, there's this question of, well, if we're introducing AI into legal decisions, we're making this process less transparent. Could this impact the perceived legitimacy of judicial decisions? Could it then lead to a decrease in the sort of compliance, the extent to which the general public will say, yes, like that decision, we don't like it, but we'll still comply with it. And just to not talk too much, but sort of the reverse side of this is if you have judges who are also looking at AI generated briefs, is there a possibility that they have the same level of skepticism toward AI as the general public, where they think, oh, this thing was written by, or was written with the assistance of AI, maybe I'm less likely to believe the argument because maybe I have some preconceived bias about, the role of AI in law or how competent they actually are, so et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's really where we see the ethical considerations, but perhaps that is for a later podcast where we can really dive deeply into some of these concerns.
Very
But thank you
interesting.
so much for that wonderful question, Hans Paul.
No, I mean, if I can double click, and of course we want to talk about this a bit later, but so you're saying that people may not accept a decision made by AI, right? And same thing for the other side of the table, judges may not be. Do you have any insights about this, or what's your personal belief about that?
No, I think that's a wonderful question. So I think backing up a little bit, unfortunately, there really isn't that many empirical studies out there about how all of these things operate together. So like part of my research right now is really trying to get at the question that you, Hans Paul, just asked. And so I think my intuition at the moment is that people will likely be they will perceive these decisions to be less legitimate. But whether or not that has a direct impact on their behavior, I think is a different question. So Tom Tyler at Yale, he is well known for sort of engaging in this wonderful research relating to compliance and legitimacy to the legal system, legal authorities. And part of what he finds is that the transparency of a system is very important for the extent to which someone will perceive a decision or an action as legitimate. And I sort of mentioned before, like when we throw AI in there, where it is this black box that the general public won't really understand, and experts are sometimes sort of grappling to understand as well, that's really going to mess up that sort of input transparency, output chain, right? And so I think my personal intuition is that there's going to be a decrease in the extent to which the public will perceive a lot of legal decisions to be legitimate. But I think that's something that's more of an empirical question that we should, wait to see how it bears out in reality.
Nice. We are looking forward to hearing more once you are done with the research project. Nice.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that great question.
Cool. Maybe any insight on? Well, I think these days people are taking the bar exam. Is it correct?
Yes,
In the US
exactly.
at least. So, what are your thoughts about that? And how GPT-4 took the bar exam and passed it, with a good mark. So, what are the implications of that, and how can we be valuable about that?
No, I think that's an excellent question. So I think it is now day 2 of the bar. So shout out to my friends who yesterday had to brave through that full bar exam. We're very proud of them. But nice. I think Hans Paul, yes, Hans Paul, I think your answer is perfect because what you mentioned is there were some faculty members at Chicago, Ken, and Michigan State Law School who ended up deploying GPT-4 on not only the bar exam but also on the multi-state bar exam. So ChatGPT ended up scoring in the 90th percentile of the bar exam, which is very impressive. Ended up passing all sections of the MBE. So they did like super well in contracts where they got around 88.1% of the questions correct. And then they did well in evidence, they did well in criminal procedure and law, and they're scoring, like in the, like they're getting 80% of these questions right, which is in some ways more impressive than what I would be able to do were I to take this exam now, right? So I think it raises these important questions of, to what extent this might render bar exams in the future obsolete. But I don't think I have a good answer to that about like where this puts us in the future. I think we as lawyers and law students more generally are still trying to grapple with, like house smartdom. So maybe for a future podcast, I'll think more deeply about this question and then we can return to it. But no, I think that's definitely something for folks to have in mind. Okay, so I know, Hans Paul, you have important meetings with funders and everyone, but do you mind sort of helping us conclude this podcast by telling us a little bit about the future prospects and challenges for LLMs legal tech? Like you mentioned, there's like massive advancements in AI capacities. Can you talk a little bit more about those advancements and how you see them potentially impacting the legal industry?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Alice. So LLMs are a great advancement in themselves. About the good things that are going to happen is, of course, we can reduce the manual work when training the previous models and being able to have more well-performing models in terms of accuracy, instead of manual taking a lot of data. But as you said, we have to be aware of biases, as you mentioned before, as some models are becoming dumber. So those are both advantages in terms of training and improvements, and at the same time are threats in terms of making sure that we don't create too much biases. Yeah. So in terms of challenges, I think the adoption, of course, is one of the in the legal sphere, right? Is one of the big issues, especially for boutique law firms and law firms who have been doing things for many years in the same way, using their frameworks, the internal models and processes. But we have seen a lot of new entrants in those markets by newcomers. So I think they're opening up not just their their doors, but their minds to try new technology. So that's the future is going to see more and more integration of AI into the process of the day-to-day activities, both in-house and outside legal, and not just in improving the internal processes, but providing a better service to our customers, meaning that online services kind of licensing our own knowledge and know-how, and giving it out to our customers and clients as lawyers, right? So technology is going to make us, maybe as lawyers, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm saying as lawyers, it could make us, smarter at the same time. Not smarter, but probably being able to reach more customers with the same knowledge that we have and the same 24 hours that we all have.
Right. Well, it sounds incredible. And so I think it's very exciting in some ways because Hans Paul, you're really at the forefront of this. Like you are leading the charge in many ways at SpeedLegal.
We are.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So I think, again, wonderful. But thank you so much, Hans Paul, for a wonderful conversation. It was so great to hear your thoughts about LLMs, about the future of all of this going forward. And I know you have, again, so much on your plate right now. So I think I will let you go. But, thank you everyone in here for just tuning in for our podcast. And going forward, we'll be bringing this back. So hopefully we'll see you next week. But thank you guys all for coming. Truly, truly delightful. And I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you, Alice.
All right, take care, everyone. Bye.